Tash Dile, this is Sakina Bhatt and you're watching In Conversation with Tibet TV. Joining with me for today's episode, I have a social activist and the co-founder of an NGO called the Drokmo, which is an organization set up to pursue gender equality in the Tibetan and Himalayan communities. Please welcome Kaysang. Welcome to the show, Kaysang. Kaysang, ever since I thought of doing this episode with you, I really wanted to discuss about the fact that in the Tibetan community, there is a typical way of saying Hanzu chizonalia when it comes to sexual harassment. Hanzu chizonalia indishra yomare, which means in our community, sexual harassment is very rare. Personally, being a woman myself, I feel that this is kind of wrong because sexual harassment is something that exists in all types of societies. Since you have been involved with issues like sexual harassment, gender inequality and all of that, what do you have to say about this?
So growing up as a woman, in the Tibetan community, I would say that I have personally experienced incidences of sexual violence, and then I have heard a lot of stories from my friends, co-workers, a lot of women who have experienced the same things. Through Drokmo's work, there has been evidence to prove that this actually exists and that it's not just the stories of a few women. For example, we have done a study in 5 Tibetan schools that we work with, and we found that for children between the ages of 10 and 19, out of 401 students that we did the study with, 105 students have experienced sexual violence, and that is just in 5 schools. So we can say that it's almost like 1 out of every 4 students has experienced this. And it's not just girls, but also boys. And then we have also tried to help women who have faced sexual violence. Like over the last year, I think we have helped around 6 women, and they're all Tibetans.
So they personally came and put their complaints?
Yes, because I think they felt that since our work concerns like gender equality and violence, they felt that we might be able to help them, and we have been helping them with mediating in cases, and like whether it's sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, such cases come up.
So has it been successful? How difficult it is to deal with such situations?
I think like each case is completely different, completely unique, even though we might get 2 cases of, let's say, sexual harassment. In both scenarios, people involved are very different. The workplaces where they are employed are very different. The way that the abuser also handles the case or responds to when we try to talk to the abuser, their response also differs. So some of the cases have been quite easy from our side to handle, but I think from the victim's side, it has always been a really harrowing experience for everybody involved. And from the abuser's side, I would say that almost every single abuser has denied that they have ever done anything wrong.
Okay. Speaking about Tibetan community in particular, what I feel is that most of the women who has fell a victim to this sexual harassment thing, they prefer to be quiet because they don't want to be the talk of the community and all of that. Now recently, Central Tibetan Administration, they have adopted this policy, Internal Committee Against Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace. So do you think that because of the adoption of this policy, there is going to be an improvement in the community?
It is definitely a really big step towards ensuring that women in the CTA, at least women employees, are guaranteed a degree of safety that they weren't guaranteed earlier. Even though there was a sexual harassment policy, internal committees, it is required by the law. It makes sure that there are proper processes which are followed in order to ensure that sexual harassment at the workplace is prevented, prohibited, and then redressed. So the whole act is called Sexual Harassment at the Workplace Prevention, Prohibition, and Redressal Act. It is definitely a step forward and a very huge step forward. But just having policies in place, just having processes in place cannot ensure that the attitudes of the people who are living in that community are changed. It does not ensure that, right? So what are the other steps that we can take as a community or as individual organizations? What are the steps that we can take to ensure that men and women who are employed under your particular organization are exposed to different ways of thinking, understand that, like, consent and violence, like, how these things work, like, power dynamics, how these things influence, like, how you relate to each other, and how, like, gender relations exist in the workplace. So all of these things have to go together along with having a policy.
Tell us something about your organization called Drokmo. What kind of events do you host?
Drokmo was started in 2018 by me and my colleague, Billion. We have currently worked with 9 Tibetan schools. There is a gap in our community, in our schools, where children do not receive sex education in any form. So we are trying to fill in that gap by going to different schools and conducting workshops on comprehensive sex education. So what we cover is sexual and reproductive health, and also like sexual and gender-based violence. That is one of our primary programs. And then we also have a girls' scholarship program for girls from marginalized and economically disadvantaged backgrounds, which is funded by the Tibet Fund. Our programs are primarily funded by the Tibet Fund currently. And then I think from this year, we will be adding 6 more schools to our school program. And then we will also begin working with Tibetan youth, college going, and like, let's just say 18 to 30 years old youth. We will also be starting our work with communities, working in Tibetan settlements. Then one of the most important projects that we are focusing on is responsible menstrual health management, where schools and settlements, they're introduced to sustainable menstrual health management. So all of us, I think a large percentage of the female population, we use disposable pads which contain plastic, right? Because we have not been exposed to the idea that, there are washable cloth pads which we can use, which are healthier for the environment and healthier for our bodies too. There are menstrual cups that we can use, which are like made from silicone and do not harm our bodies as much. Or we can also explore organic disposable pads. So these are the things that we are trying to introduce to schools and settlements, so that waste that is produced from using menstrual products month on month, like year after year, that is reduced, and also women are healthier. Women and girls are healthier. Yeah.
Also, like you just mentioned that most of the visits that you make are to the schools, I have also noticed that. So why do you think that students, because they are the main target for all the workshops that you organize, so why do you think that students are so important?
I think for me personally, working with students and working with children and the youth is important for primarily 3 reasons. One, growing up in TCV schools, I personally have experienced the lack of comprehensive sex education. Comprehensive sex education is actually really important because when kids are growing up, when you become an adolescent, you require healthy ways of dealing with the changes that are happening in your body. And health does not just mean physical health; it means sexual and reproductive health, and physical health, obviously, and then mental health. All of these things have to be taken into consideration together for children to grow up in a holistically healthy way. That is currently missing in our schools. And then secondly, from my travels to many different settlements and schools, we have found that there is a high rate of gynecological diseases and different issues in older women, and that is because they lacked the knowledge on how to take care of themselves, how to take care of their sexual and reproductive health when they were younger. So, and then thirdly, we also found that there are high rates of anecdotal evidence that show us that sexual violence against children and sexual violence against women is prevalent. It happens, and it happens very frequently. The best way to address all of these is to work with students and youth to begin with, so that at least from a very young age, children are conscious about how to take care of themselves, whether it's physical health or sexual and reproductive health, or how to protect themselves. And secondly, it's important because through our programs, we also try to ensure that children understand that they must also not become violent. They must also not become abusers themselves, whether it's through bullying in general or through sexual violence that they might perpetrate.
How receptive are the students?
The students have been really wonderful to work with, because when we do activities that talk about consent and violence, when we do activities that talk about stigma and discrimination, I think every child has experienced incidences where they feel that somebody said something that has hurt them, somebody did something that hurt them. And it is a common experience for every child, but they never really have an environment or words in which to put across how hurt they were or how angry they were when they went through that. Through our programs, I think the children, they have mentioned it to us too, and like we also feel that they have found a space in which like they can talk about a lot of things that they are going through and in a safe space. So the kids have responded really well. We've been working with them for 2 years now. This will be our 3rd year. They look forward to our sessions. They look forward to talking with us. They look forward to asking us all sorts of questions that they cannot ask other adults.
So during the workshops, like, do they come to you personally and then tell about their experiences, about how they fell victim to sexual harassment and all of that?
Well,
or do they hesitate?
Well, I don't think any child has spoken like very openly about facing severe degrees of sexual violence, I would say. But through our interactions, when we mentioned that, like, sexual violence does not just mean rape. It can also be somebody touching you. We generally think that, like, just our chest or our, like, private parts, these are the sensitive parts, and, like, other the body parts are okay, right? But that is not the case. Somebody touching us without our consent, without us wanting them to touch us, like, in any way, or even saying anything to us that might, like, sound wrong to us in some way. All of these constitute sexual violence, right? So when we tell kids about our own experiences growing up, or even, like, what we go through on a daily basis as women, children really open up and they tell us that, like, oh, there was this, like, older person who is my neighbor, or, like, who works in our school, who also did this to me. So, like, children also have a lot of stories to share.
Okay, Kaysang, like you mentioned earlier, I understand that you have a collaboration with Tibet Fund in the scholarship program of Tibetan women. So how are the recipients of the scholarship selected, and on what basis?
So the Girls Scholarship Program is completely funded by the Tibet Fund and administered by Drokmo. The girls are selected on a needs basis. So it's a needs-based scholarship where we select girls who are from marginalized and economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Basically, girls who, without our scholarship, would not be able to go to college, and or, like, even to do a professional course or a vocational course. They would not be able to do that without our support. So these are the girls that we are focusing on. Our scholarship actually takes care of not just tuition fees. We also provide them an allowance that can last them through the academic year. And then we also focus on trying to link them up with potential mentors that are working in their own fields, like in their own professional fields. In March, we're going to be providing them a training on skills development, basically employability skills, soft skills, communication skills, leadership skills. And for that, we're looking to collaborate with Empowering the Vision, which is an organization that has been working on these areas in the Tibetan community for a really long time.
So this scholarship program funded by the Tibet Fund, it's held every year?
Yes, so this year will be the 3rd year.
So how many girls are selected in 1 year?
It actually depends on funding. So in the first year, we were able to provide scholarship to 12 girls, but in the 2nd year, since we did not have enough funds, we could only provide scholarship to 6 new girls. Yeah, and for this year, we are still looking at how many girls we can fund. Yeah.
So how do you disseminate your information about feminism besides visiting schools?
Rather than talking about feminism as such, Drokmo works on ensuring gender justice, ensuring gender equity, basically, through 4 main avenues, which is access to education, access to health, healthcare, safety from violence, and livelihoods. So these are the 4 main areas through which we want to work, and our work currently cannot support the livelihoods program, but we are hoping that within the next 3 years we will be able to start programs on that.
So Kaysang, again coming back to the sexual harassment case, what can be done in order to avoid such situations in our community, and apart from women, what roles can men play to improve the situation?
I think the first step is actually accepting that people who face violence are mostly women. the percentage of women who face violence is much higher than the percentage of the rate of women facing sexual and gender-based violence is much higher than men, right? And if we also look at who is the perpetrator, who is the one who has committed that act of violence, that is also very less in women. Women are generally more victims rather than the perpetrators, and men are the ones who perpetrate sexual and gender-based violence more. These are facts. You cannot just say that just because you do not want to accept it, it does not change facts. The first step is accepting that this happens and who does it, who gets abused. Rather than just focusing on the problem, I think we need to move as a community. We need to look at how can we find solutions to this. What can we do to ensure that this does not happen, that this stops happening. For us to move towards a solution, I think first step is accepting that there is a problem, and then secondly, since we all live in the same community, we all are part of this community, it is not about you are the one who is in the wrong and I'm the victim, or saying that I do not want to accept that this is happening. Let's not talk about it. That is not going to work. If we want to find solutions, if we want to ensure that everybody in our community is safe, is healthy, is protected, is respected, as a community we have to change the way that we think. And how can that happen? Through education, I would say, ensuring that everybody is aware of what is happening and everybody is aware of what are the solutions that we can find towards ensuring that this problem ends. And I think a solution is not just empowering women, because women might be empowered. Women might reach a stage in which we are all confident, we are all able to do whatever we want, but then we do not exist in isolation in a society. We exist with the men in our community. We exist with other genders, right? Everybody exists together in a society. So what can the men do? Men can make sure that they accept the fact that sometimes there are things that they do which hurt others. This idea of what we call toxic masculinity. It does not mean that stop being a man, stop doing the things that you are doing. But are there ways in which your idea of what it means to be a man, is it possible that these ideas are actually hurting others? These ideas are they actually hurting you too? So I think it would take a very long time of self-reflection, working with men and women both together, and looking at ourselves as a society, as a whole, rather than existing in isolation. It's going to take a long time, but I think everybody needs to work together towards this.
Okay, so Kaysang, at a very young age, you decided to start off with this NGO called Drokmo. So tell us, how did you get inspired to champion this cause?
I have always been involved in the Tibetan community, in activism, I would say, political activism, since I was 15 through Students for a Free Tibet. When I went to college, I was introduced to feminist theory through my literature class. And then from there, I started to pay attention to how does all of this relate to my community? How does this make sense for me as a Tibetan, right? And it led to me joining some other women who set up the Tibetan Feminist Collective. That started in 2015. And from there, after I came back to Dharamshala and started working with the Tibetan community again after my college, I think it was sort of a natural progression to social activism in general, and then paying more attention to gender justice in our community. And I had the opportunity in 2017 to travel to more than 15, I would say, different settlements and schools and colleges all across India and Nepal. I think that I always existed in the little bubble of Dharamsala. I grew up here, right? So I never knew the stories of the women who existed in all of these different settlements, all of these different contexts. So when I had the opportunity through the CTA to travel to all of these different places and talk to around I would say close to 400 men and women across all different age groups, I saw how much this work was needed. For me, I think it was not enough to just talk about these things, which is what I had been doing with the Tibetan Feminist Collective. it was, I think, time to put everything I had into action if I really wanted to see change. And then Tibet Fund's call for proposals came in 2018. So me and my friend Pelyun, we submitted our proposal for different projects, and I think they liked it, so they decided to fund us.
And that's how Drokmo started. Kaysang, it was lovely having you here, and thank you for speaking to us for such an important issue.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next episode of In Conversation with Tibettv.